Alright guys, in this video we are going to see how we can select elements through their name selector. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to initialize our driver, which we're going to do by saying WebDriver. We're calling it driver. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it even browser if you want. Equals new Chrome driver, because we're going to use the Chrome browser. And as you can see, we are getting two errors here. The errors are that we are missing using directive, or simply the dependencies. So we're simply going to include them, or the shortcut here is to press Ctrl and dot and then enter. So we had to add two different dependencies for both of these to fix them. Then we have to use our browser or driver, let's call it driver again. We have to tell it which URL it should open. So we say driver.navigate.go to URL, and we have to supply the URL in the form of a string. So here is the web page where we're going to find our element with the name selector. This is the element. So we're going to get the URL of this page, copy, paste here, and we have the URL now. So now, after we open the page, we have to find the element, which means that we have to create the element in our code. We will do this by saying iWebElement driver.findElement, and here we have to say we have to tell the driver how it's going to find the element, what selector it should use. So in our case, we say that we're going to use the name selector, so we're going to say by. By is the class that gives us all the selectors that we can use. So we say by name, and again we have to supply the name of the name selector as a string. So let's inspect the element and see what is the name of its name selector, name attribute. So here is the element. You can see that it lights up when I mouse over here. So we know that this is the element we are looking for. And here is the name selector, which is my name. It's called my name. So we simply have to write my name here. And what we're going to do is that we're going to check if our driver is able to see this element, if the element is visible on the page. We know that it is, but after all, this is the point of testing. So we're going to say if element dot displayed. So this will return Boolean value, which will be either true or false, depending on whether the element is displayed on the page or not, whether it's visible or not. So if it's visible, we're going to print out a message in our console that will say, yes, I can see the element. It's right there. And we're going to say else. If we don't see the element, if the driver doesn't see the element, it will say something like, well, something went wrong. I couldn't see the element. I'm making so many typos. Alright, and after that we're going to close the driver, since we are no longer going to do anything on this web page, so we no longer need it, and we're simply going to quit it. Alright, let's run it and see what will happen. Alright, here is our console. Alright, so we can see the message in the console right here. It said that it can see the element, which is great. Now, I like to have different color messages So it's convenient sometimes to have a green message, sometimes to have a red message. In our particular case right here, if we can see the element, we can print the message in green. So we can say green message here. We're going to create our own methods for printing messages, and red message if we can't. So we get errors because these methods, green message and red message, do not exist in our current project. We're going to create them. So simply click on the green message and either click show potential fixes and generate method, or you can also click on it and press Ctrl and enter, which is exactly the same thing. Then delete these throw exceptions, rename the string, use a proper name for the string, like message, since we're printing some message. And in order to print a green or red message, we first have to change the foreground color of the console, and we do this by saying console foreground color equals console color. It suggests it automatically, and we say green. Oops, this is the red message, so we say red. And then we say console right line, we write our message, and then we change the color back to white, or whatever is the default color for your console. It may be different with you, I don't know. It's white for me. Foreground color white. And we will do the same thing for the green message, except that we're going to say green here. Alright, and if we run it again, we should get the same result, only this time it should be in green. Alright, there it is. So this is enough for this video. We're going to continue with our next selector in the next video. Alright guys, welcome to the next video. In this video we're going to see the ID selector, how we can select elements with it. It's pretty much the same thing, but we're going to do a couple of things different. The first thing that I'm going to do here is that I'm first going to copy the red and green message methods that we made in the last video. So I will simply copy them back here so that I can use them. There's no need for me to make them again. So let's include our missing system. So what else do we need? We need to initialize our driver, which is WebDriver, new Chrome driver. And again, we have missing dependencies, using, all right, we got our driver. Then we had to navigate, go to URL, and the difference here will be that we're going to extract the URL out of the method. So we're going to create a new string here, the string URL, let's call it URL. And we're going to pass this URL down here. So let's see what is the URL. Alright, so this is the web page with the ID element that we're going to test. This is the element, this picture here. So this is our URL. We're going to copy it and paste it here. So we now have extracted the URL and we're only going to use our variable down here. Now, this may seem like it's too much for this simple project, but imagine that you have some bigger project. It will be much easier for you if you have all your variables extracted somewhere else. Leaving something in your code that you don't know what it is. It's called a magical number, or in this case, a magical string. Maybe it's not that magical, but it may be hard to find it in a bigger project. Alright, so the next thing that we had to do is create our element, web element equals driver. We call the driver to find the element by ID. And now we have to supply the ID of this element, and we're going to do it the same way. We're going to create a string for the ID and extract it. So let's call it id string id equals. Let's see what is the ID of our element. So we are simply going to inspect it. And we can see here that the ID of the element is test image. Let's write it here, test image. And we can do the same thing like we did the last time. Let's delete this row. We can do the same thing with an if element displayed green message. Yes, I can see it. Or a red message if it's missing for some reason. Red message. Nope, it's not there. Alright, and let's close the driver, quit it in the end, and let's see what will happen. It's building the project. Since it's first time, it usually is a bit slow. Yes, it can see the element. That's perfect. I guess that this is enough. We didn't see many new things except for the new selector and the extraction of the ID and the URL. So let's move on to the next video. We have a couple of more selectors to see, and we're going to see a few other things being different. So let's move on. So this will be a very short video in which I'm going to show you how you can use the class name selector. Let's get our URL and our selectors. You already know how to do this. This is our URL. This is the page with the class name selector that we're going to use. This is the element that has a class name. So let's paste our URL. Let's get our class name. As you can see, our class name is test class, and this class name allows us to select this whole paragraph, this text. We are not selecting a text field, we are not selecting an image, we are selecting a paragraph with text. So let's put the selector in its string. Oops, it was test class, right? Alright, and let's create the element driver find element by class name, and now let's do something different here. Instead of checking if the element is visible or not, let's take its text and output it in the console. We can do this by saying element, and you can see here that we have a text method which gets the inner text of this element without any leading or trailing white space. Alright, so let's do this. We actually have to put it in the console right line since we want to output it, and let's see what will happen. Let's run it. Bit slow building the project, and there it is. There is the text of this element. So this is a nice thing to have, because you can use it, for example, to check if the texts on your page are the ones that you expect them to be. For example, you can check a text on a button and see if there is a typo or if something changed over time or anything you want. It's really, everything is up to your imagination. Alright, let's move on to the next and last video about selectors, where we're going to talk about XPath and CSS Path Selectors. They're a bit interesting and you're going to use them a lot as well. So let's not waste any more time and see you there. Alright guys, in this video we're going to explore the last two selectors that we're going to use with Selenium, and these are the CSS Path and the XPath. Now I'm going to show you what they look like, and then I will tell you which one is better, when to use and why. So let's first go to our page, and if you open any of these posts, you will see that there are no elements that I have prepared for you. And the reason for that is because CSS and XPath selectors aren't really nice like the ID and the names and the class names. You can simply use them on anything on your page. They let you select anything that you can see. As I have written here, you can pick anything you want. So let's, for example, take this search box. Let's inspect it. And you can see that it has some class name, and maybe it's not a very good example. Let's take this image, for example. Alright, so it has some title, but doesn't matter. So you right click on the element that you need. You go to copy, and here you can see copy selector and copy XPath. Copy selector will give you the CSS path. So let's copy the CSS path. Let's paste it here. And you can see that it's something that is kind of like a map. It tells Selenium where, what rows to follow through the HTML code, because as you know, the HTML code is simply things nested in other things. So it tells the code to find post 108, this is an ID, then go in the first div, then go in the first figure, and then go in the image in the first figure. Maybe this is why it's called path in general, because it gives Selenium the path it needs to take. So let's take the XPath for this same image. Copy XPath, and let's paste the XPath here. As you can see, it's pretty much the same thing, with the only difference here that you have to remove these spaces and then escape the quotes. So as you can see, the XPath is a bit more ugly, at least in my opinion, but it doesn't matter if it's ugly or beautiful. It simply needs to get the work done. And it pretty much says the same thing. Go at ID, post 108, go in the first div, go in the figure, go in the image, and there you will find what you're looking for. So let's also take our URL and let's test them. So let's see if we can see these elements. We first have to create our elements. So let's call this CSS Path element and driver find element by CSS Selector, and here we say CSS Path, and let's create our XPath element. XPath element driver find element by XPath and XPath selector. Oops, it's only XPath. Alright, so let's see if we can see these elements. CSS path element displayed green message. I can see the CSS path element. I can see the CSS path element. Now let's make a red message. I can't see the CSS path element. Now let's do the same thing for the XPath. Alright, XPath element. And come on. Oh, I have missed a semicolon here. Alright, and with the driver, it's here. If we run this now, we should get 2 green messages. Let's test this. Alright, it's only that this is the XPath. Let's run it again. Alright, it can see both of these elements. Now, which one you should use and why? In general, it's much better to use the CSS Path elements, CSS Path Selectors, because these are better supported by the browsers. Internet Explorer, for example, has a very poor support for XPath, and in general, the CSS selector works much faster than the XPath. So if you need performance out of your tests, you should use CSS selectors. They are much faster to work with. Alright, so enough talking, let's move on to the next video. We're going to see what will happen if we actually can't find these elements. Something really nasty happens there, so see you in the next video. Alright guys, in this video I'm going to show you what will happen if we can't actually find the elements we're looking for, and how we can handle this situation, because it throws an exception and exceptions aren't really nice. So I will simply break the selector, which won't allow Selenium to find the element that it's looking for, and you will see what will happen. Let's first run it to show you what will happen. It's building the project. It will take a few seconds. And there it is. We see that we have no such element exception, no such element unable to locate the element. It's because this element does not exist. And what we have to do in this case is that instead of using if, we're going to use a try-catch block. Try-catch block. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to move this here, move our green message here as well, and we are going to move our red message in the catch block. And we're going to delete this, and we have to put the CSS path element displayed inside an if, because it after all has to return some boolean value. And let's do this. If, place this in the if, so that we have the same thing like before. Let's move our green message as well, not like this. Out format it. By the way, out formatting the code, if you don't know how to do it, for example, if you have some very bad formatted code, I didn't delete anything today. I deleted a bracket. Alright, so if you have some very poorly formatted code like this, if you first select click Ctrl and A to select everything, and then you press Ctrl K D, and it automatically formats everything for you, except the removing of the free spaces, of the free rows. So we also have to change the exception here. Our exception is no such element exception. Alright, let's see what will happen. Come on, come on. And we have an exception again. So why is this? Well, let's see. It says that the exception is at line 17. What do we have there? Let's see, line 17. It's our element. So why does this happen? It happens because the driver tries to find the element outside of the try-catch block. So in order to fix this, we have to move our element inside the try-catch block as well. So we can do this in one of two ways, and I will do it like this. I will simply leave the element there, and I will initialize it here. Path element. Alright, and let's run the code and see what will happen now. There, it couldn't see the CSS path element, it could not find it. This is it for the no such element exception. It happens all the time, especially with the dynamic websites where everything changes all the time. Sometimes your element may not load in time, and it's not really nice. Alright, see you in the next video. Alright, so we saw all the different kinds of selectors that we can use, and the question remains which one we should use and when. And the answer isn't really complicated, it's actually very simple. If you can use an ID or a name, use it. They are at the highest place in the priority chain. So ID and name, best case scenario. After the name and the ID comes the class name, and the class name can mostly be used if you want to target several different elements that go by the same class or some similar case. And last, CSS and XPath. You use CSS and XPath only if you don't have any other choice. And the best thing that you can do is simply to talk with the front-end guy in your team and explain him why you need him to use better selectors for the elements, because it's up to him to place names, IDs, and class names and so on. So if you can really do this is the best thing that you can do. It's much easier to have a name for your elements, like we saw here. For example, we have a name, my name, just a testing name. It's much easier to have this than to have nothing at all, like this image, for example, where you have nothing but simply the source for the image and the title. So here, for example, you should use a CSS path simply because you have no other choice, and there are probably more elements on this page that you should use a CSS path for them. And the most important reason why you should use a name and an ID over a CSS path is because of maintainability. What this means is that things can change around your web page. For example, this image is here now, but tomorrow your team may decide to move it on this column here, and then your CSS path will change. And when that happens, your tests will start to break. But if this image had a name or an ID selector, this name or ID selector won't change. And your tests won't break, simply because the image is still here on this page. It's simply in a different place, but it still has the same name. So this is probably the most important reason why you should use name and ID over CSS path or XPath. So let's move on to the next videos and start working with some of the special elements with Selenium, like text boxes, alert boxes, radio and check buttons, and more. See you in the next videos.